Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes.
I am so excited to have Peter Panagore back on the show today. If you weren't able to listen in to his first interview, please tune back to last week and listen to the beginning of his fascinating story. Peter is a two-time near-death experiencer. He is also best-selling author of Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. Welcome back to the program, Peter. I'd like to put the beginning of this interview into a little bit of context. The interview last week ended when Peter was talking about during his near-death experience, and he was on the other side having a conversation with the divine. During this conversation, he was talking about the reasons he would want to come back to this earthly realm. And the theater company was one of them, interestingly. So this is where this interview begins. Enjoy.
I was in a theater company going on a national tour.
I love the story. One reason it's so profound is that you were you. You know, this was happening, but you were you enough that you, of course, cared about your parents, but then that you'd think about the theater company. So I love this part.
I was a Boy Scout. I made this promise. I was like, because before I was in the Theater of Silence out of Montana State University.
Yes.
They'd been on tour for 20 years.
And that was for the deaf.
It was for the
correct?
deaf, and it was in sign language.
Yes.
And we had 64 shows planned, 24,000 miles, and they did this every year. And I was in the new cast. I was this year's cast, and the director had to actually Jack, who is I love Jack. I still know Jack. Okay, yes. He's old now, but he's still beautiful. And he actually took my collar and said, "Don't you get hurt on this trip, because there are no understudies. You'll ruin it for everybody."
Oh my God. It's just
like pressure. And so I said to God, I'm leaving on this theater tour. I made this promise. I was, and God gives no answer. And so God's like, welcome, come home, love, enter into my love. And I said, I still haven't got through the door yet. And God said, no, you haven't. I said, well, if I go back to live my life, can I come back here to the oneness of being? If I go back to help my parents so that they don't have to endure this suffering, because I know they're going to get peace in the end, but between now and then, it's going to be terrible,
yes.
Worse.
Yes.
And if I can prevent that, and know that I can come back here, so can I come back here? If I go back and live my life to this oneness of being, this infill of beauty and joy? And God said, yes, you can come back here, but I want you to stay. And I said, well, since I get to come back here, I choose to live my life. And God said, you won't live your life. Sent me back. And on the way back, I chose an entry point back into my life. It was like I had 10 million choices of where I was going, of what kind of life I would live. I was making a choice of the life I would live. And there was it was like this big round circle with all 10 million entry points, and all these were like strands of my future life, but they all interacted. I could see all of it. And there were all these interactions of the choices that I would make that would create the life that I lived, and move between these. Like if I chose this entry point up here, I could end up down here because of all the choices that I made. But in the middle of this was the purity of the beam of the one light itself. And I thought, as I went and I had an instant to make this choice, I was like, nah, I like fun too much. And so I chose off to the side. I didn't choose the high edge of absolute hedonism. I kind of went toward the middle edge of bohemianism. And and so I made that decision, and the next thing I knew, I was being crushed down like a deflating balloon under pressure. Like I still had, I felt like I was still infilled with the oneness, and it was all squeezed out of me. It was all crushed out of me, and then I felt like I was screwed back into my body painfully. It was a very painful process, and then suddenly I'm back in this wretched thing that I don't understand, and because I know that I'm not this thing, I don't know what this thing is. And I'm just racked with pain, painlessness, full of pain in an instant. And it took a while for me to come back online, like my brain to start functioning and start understanding my body and breathing and heartbeat, and all these things were going on, and I'm suffering, and I don't know how long I'm there, and I'm being jostled, and I'm feeling jostled, and now I'm beginning to hear sound, and I hear screaming, but I don't know it's screaming. I hear noise, and eventually I'm being pulled, and I kind of climb up, and I'm coming back to consciousness, and my partner Tim, and he's talking. I can see him, and it's like, and I don't understand what's going on, and finally I hear him screaming at me, "You were dead. You were dead. If you died, I died." And he's totally in a panic. I mean, all night long, totally level-headed, not level-headed now. Just fear, like pure fear, and joy, because now I'm back.
Right.
And so as I've come back to my body again and begin to understand what's going on inside me, he gets me to pull on the rope, and I pull on the rope, and it came free on the first pull, like a miracle. Meanwhile, I'm totally disoriented. So
I would think so.
I'm living inside of this thing. My impression is I'm keenly aware that I am not my body. I feel like I'm in a movie or in a play, and I'm not this person. But who am I, and what happened to me, and where was I, and how? And I feel like I was a completely different person, but I didn't have any containment units for what had happened to me. No way to explain to myself where I was now or what had happened to me. But I knew that I was utterly not the person that I had been before. I was like a new person in an old body.
Right. Were you processing at all? Or I mean,
I was in shock.
You were in shock.
I was in shock, and I was trying to figure out, because I felt like I was in two places. I was. Okay, so this is my first experience of being in two places at once. And so I'm always in two places at once now. And but when this first happened, I was like 2/3 up here and 1/3 in here. And so I'm trying to negotiate between these two worlds at the same time. And so just existing was hard. I didn't begin to process for a while. I took this class I was in the English department, and I went outside into the philosophy department. I took a class, it was in the comparative literature department. Comparative literature, East and West. And we read this book by a guy named C.F. Happold, which I recommend to everybody. C.F. Happold, the book is titled Mysticism. It's a survey, a book of a survey, great for 101 class, of mystical writings from around the world. And when I say mystical writings, I'm not talking about incense and crystals. I'm talking about the Buddha. I'm talking about Rumi and Julian of Norwich and Meister Eckhart. And so when we read this book, and I take this class, and I go to him for a meeting, and I say, he's a Catholic deacon. And meanwhile, we've planned a trip to a Zazen retreat to the Trappist monastery, where I went to Catholic high school, Catholic prep school, and my teacher, my senior year, had gone to the same monastery, learned the practice of meditation from the monks, and brought it back to us. And I've been a meditator anyway, since I took to it immediately in 77.
Yes.
So this is like 82 or something. And, or I don't remember what year it was, 80. And I say to him, I've got this friend who had this mystical experience, and he's trying to find, I'm totally lying to him. And I don't know if he knew that I was lying to him, but I was definitely lying to him. And I said, he's trying to find his way into the oneness of being, back to where he was. And what should he do? Should he become a Zen Buddhist? Should he become a Hindu? And he said to me, no, you should tell your friend to stay within the tradition he was raised in, whatever that happened to be, because within all major religions, there is a taproot of mysticism, and that if he's really intent on finding the divine, he'll find it within the literature of the mystics, within his culture, and then he won't have to learn a new culture, and he won't have to learn new languages. He'll be able to build on what he already has.
And you were raised Catholic?
Catholic and Orthodox. And so I discovered that in this C.F. Appold's book that there were true mystics in the West. Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, people who have had these unitive transportive experiences that are not spoken of in the West, because the Catholic Church likes to keep them at arm's length. People like in 20th century, Teilhard de Chardin, who was silenced. His writings were not published, or Thomas Merton, who was silenced for a while. They wanted to keep him away from people.
So he told you to go within your own
culture tradition.
Find that little niche mysticism in that. So, but that's not what you did.
Well, it is sort of. So we go to this monastery for this Zazen retreat. And we get to spend an hour with the guest master. His name is Theophane Boyd, Father Theophane Boyd, who's also the novitiate master. And so I walk into this room, and so I came back. One of the side effects that I came back with is that I see the light in every single person. I fall in love with every single person that I meet. It's not like I want to do that. It's just a side effect of it. And I see, if I look, the shimmer that radiates this far away from every single person. And so I walk into this room with my classmates, and we sit down, and I see this guy, and he's like a pillar of glowing light. He's like, it's not like this, it's like this. And I was like, oh my God, I'd never seen such a thing. And when he looks around the room, and he looks at me, it was like getting hit with blue laser beams. And I thought, this man knows how to find what I lost.
My answer.
Yes.
And has the answer.
He does. And so my buddy says to him, so what's it like being you? And he closes his eyes and he rocks and he says, I used to be asleep and now I'm awake. And I thought, oh my God, this guy. And so I attached myself to him. He was kind of reluctant. But I attached myself to him as my spiritual director for 2 decades. Because he became my guide, and also in lots of different ways. So, and then I read Paramahansa Yogananda's book at the same time. So I've been studying his monastery. A little background here: centering prayer is the Thomas Keating, Basil Pemington. Might be familiar to some of your audience.
Yes.
They studied with Sasaki Roshi and Maharishi Mahayogi as they developed centering prayer. That they did this long study with these other monks in order to reinvigorate their own practice. Right. And so they came up with centering prayer, which is the basic of the meditation that I've been practicing since 1977. Meanwhile, I read Paramahansa Yogananda's book and the chapter about meditation where you can carve your way back to God. And I thought, I'm gonna seek my chakras. I'm going to look for my subtle body, because I had this experience without even trying of feeling my chi. And if I could feel it without even trying, what can I discover if I apply my whole life to it? And so I developed my own inner yoga practice while I practiced my meditation life in combination, kind of a mashup between centering prayer, Yogananda's style, and the idea in yoga is self-realization. Most of the yogis know that. But what they don't realize is that it's not about the small s, it's about the capital S. It's the union with the Atman. It's the union with the Brahma. It's the union with the oneness of being that we're in pursuit of in yoga. And that meditative practices, this is what I learned when I got my degree, in graduate school, which I didn't go to architecture. So I blew
Yes.
off the family business and the lifelong plan that I'd had since I was like 5.
Right.
To
I can't see you as an architect right now for some reason, because you're so good at this.
well, thanks. I had no choice. I
Right.
chose to come back, but I did not. I was upset the moment that I came to the second
Right.
morning when I realized what my job was. I was like, no, I don't want that job. I had this like roaring inside me saying, message. And I could hear this like in my head, message. I'm like, no way am I doing that. First of all,
Right.
I don't even know what to say because I can't even understand what had happened to me. How can I talk about what I don't even understand? And second of all, I'm not doing that. That's kooky. Everybody's think I'm crazy.
Had you even ever heard of an NDE?
Oh no, I didn't even know the name of it until 86. I didn't.
Because what year was
This
this? I mean,
was
you were like 20,
21.
19? 21.
79.
Yeah.
And I was all I knew. So the reason I took this comparative literature class, I went to the monastery. I started reading the Vedas and the Sutras and the Upanishad, and I mean, I read, not just like reading them a little bit. I read these things and the Taoism, and I read every single bit of literature that I could possibly find to try to find people like me. And I discovered that the mystics were most similar to me. I found my peer group among dead people. And so I decided that, and meanwhile, I was corresponding with a monastery and showing up on retreat, and decided that I would become a Trappist monk. But before I did, I would take my time and think about this and get a degree in mysticism. And so I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. And I got into 2 out of 3, and I decided to go to Yale. And they didn't have none of them had courses in mysticism, but all of them had classes around the university. And so when I applied, I spoke to the dean of admissions, and she agreed to become my independent study teacher for 3 years for my degree. And I didn't tell her why I was doing it. I didn't tell anybody what I was up to, because I decided that if it was real, it would manifest itself. And if it wasn't real, I didn't want to tell anybody, because then they're going to think I'm crazy.
So you were actually still kind of questioning it. I mean, I know in your heart you must have known, but still sort of questioning from the human standpoint. Was I crazy? Did I imagine this? Was it real? That sort of thing.
No, I didn't. I knew that it was real. I knew that, but I knew I feel like an autistic person. I mean, I'm not autistic, but I had to, when I came back, I had all my belief systems erased from me. All of my beliefs in everything, in culture, in haircuts, in shaving, in politics, in history, in everything. It was all gone.
Wow. Like, who am I?
Well,
who am I now?
Who am I now? Because my orientation was to the place of non-being. And so I recognized immediately that all belief systems they're invented. It's all language. Language itself is an invention. And language itself, we think, is like the defining thing for who we are, but it's really not real. It's all about comparatives. And so I had to learn how to function in the world within the rules that were presented to me. And I recognized in those rules that if you talked about stuff like this, they lock you up.
Right.
And so I decided, and furthermore, I wasn't articulate about it. I had no language even to think about it, let alone talk about it.
Well, understandably so. When you studied mysticism, who even knew they had a degree in mysticism?
Well, they don't.
Well, okay. Well, you did.
Well, I did because
you pieced it together.
I pieced it together.
Able to.
Because there were classes around the university, and Joan Forsberg, the dean of admissions, thank God for Joan, allowed me to bring in professors and to study with professors and create my own classes. So I created classes at Yale to study what I wanted.
You know what? Don't you just Those are like angels that land in your life. I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, the Jones of the world that just said, yeah, Peter, let's do it.
Let's do, what did she had nothing to gain?
Yeah, exactly. That's really beautiful that she did that. But anyway, we love you, Joan.
Yeah.
So that's where you found your tribe.
I did.
Was in mysticism and mystics. And you said with dead people, but I mean, did you find modern day mystics?
Well, I made a scholarship choice. And what I decided to do was not study anybody modern, because I figured that if the book has been passed down for centuries quietly, it has value and I could trust it
Yes.
greater. That's not to say that the
Yes.
modern mystics aren't. It's to say that I didn't know.
Right. Understood. So how did the autobiography of a yogi, I started reading that once. I'm embarrassed to say I don't think I read the whole thing. I'm sure I would remember. How did that, was it his teachings? How do you pronounce the teacher
Yogananda.
Yeah, Yogananda. Yes. Just really briefly, from his book, what are some of the lessons that you learned that really helped you?
Well, one of the things that really impressed me was that his teacher visited him after his death. After his teacher's death, his teacher visited him, and like a Christ-like sort of apparition.
Yes.
And from where I was, my perspective, was already totally possible. I mean, so I was like, this guy sees like I do.
Right.
And so I thought, and the other thing that I learned from him is that you can carve your way back. And so Desjardins calls it the self-divinization. And so it's the practice of mental focus in a form of meditation that you die to the false self and you create space for the divine. Oftentimes people say, pray for me for healing. Well, I do, because they want that, and I can pray for healing for them. But I'm much more interested in so how do I put it? I say, so somebody who wants one thing in their life, they want joy in their life, and they focus on joy over here, or healing over here. And maybe you get joy, maybe you get healing. But if you go inward, you get joy and healing and wholeness and wonderful. You get everything. You get all these gifts together because it's all part of the unity, all part of the oneness, and all our perspectives on these wonderful gifts, they're all fragmented. And so having experienced the oneness of being, my natural orientation is to want that again. And so to give the energy to another person is to, I suppose one could say, healing, but it's really about letting them sense the light that's already in them.
Yes, that makes sense. Yes.
And that's the healing. I reread Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, in which he gives the 4 characteristics of mystical experience. It's passive, it happens to you, you don't make it happen. It's transient, it has a beginning and an end. It's noetic, it leaves you with a knowledge that's lodged in your soul that is akin to wisdom and can't be spoken, it's ineffable. And so given that knowledge, because I noticed a conflict between the people who wanted to be near-death experiencers, which I do not recommend to anybody because it totally messes with your life, is that people are like, oh, I wish I could be a near-death experiencer. You're so different. And I'm like, not really. Let me think about this. Maybe near-death experience is a mystical experience, and maybe it fits within William James's 4 marks, and lo and behold, it does. And so mystical experience is another form. Near-death experience is another form of a mystical experience, which is why my peer group were long dead people, because I'm like them. And so I decided this Sunday morning to ask my friends, who here, raise your hand, has ever been visited by a deceased loved one? And nobody raises their hands. I'm like, come on, I did. And now everybody knows I'm already out as an NDE, so they feel comfortable. Half the people in the church raise their hands, 50%. And I say, so now, who here's ever told anybody? And they all say, Me.
Raise
I
their
say,
hands.
who here's ever told that in church, all hands go down? Nobody talks about it. Nobody. And I repeated that
In
process
church.
in every single church I went to. And I asked a whole bunch of other questions, like who here's ever had a angel experience? Who here's ever been out of their body? Who here's ever been visited by a ghost? Who here's ever had an enwrapping of the love of Jesus that you ascribe to Jesus that feels like love divine? And pretty soon I had 70% of every congregation raising their hands. Who's ever talked about it?
Wow.
Nobody. And so what I decided to do is write a book and expose myself. I'm going to expose my life as a secret mystic, my inner life as a stranger in a strange land. And I've asked a bunch of people, maybe 15 other people, to contribute their stories so that we can look at the wider varieties of mystical experience that happen to common people and try to broaden the tent of conversation. Because say, for instance, it wasn't until the 1970s that people began to talk about domestic violence publicly. It was a public secret. Everybody knew it was going on. Nobody talked about it.
Right.
And the same with LGBTQ.
Yep.
And so this is one of those things. Everybody knows about it. Everybody's afraid to talk about it because nobody wants to be the kook, and because lots of the Christian churches think that the revelation of God ended when the last period was put at the end of the Bible, and that God's not talking to us anymore, when it turns out that God's talking to everybody, and people are just afraid to talk about it.
It's interesting because I was listening to, I'm interviewing Mark Pitstick on Monday because they wrote a young person's book about the afterlife, and someone asked him, they said, why are people afraid to talk about this? I mean, doesn't it make sense that most people or all people would be really excited to know about this? It changes the whole dynamic. And what he said, and that's one reason I want to write this children's book, and what he said was that a lot of it is because they don't want to become hopeful. They've been beaten down so many times, and all these people that we used to put on pedestals, whether it's physicians or pastors or presidents or, everyone has just the way the world is. And it didn't, it didn't quench my curiosity because but I got it. I understood what he said. I listened carefully because it is so true. I mean, if people would just, it's just so exciting, but no one wants to talk about it.
Well, I made a specific choice in my life to be exactly who I am, and not try to put on any sort of airs, not try to pretend that I don't make mistakes. And that I have not, I have not lived a perfect life. I am not a perfect person. And I've done, even after my near-death experience, I've done things that I wish that I hadn't done. And that I'm a human being.
Human, yes.
So I think part of the cultural problem is that when we encounter people who we want to hold up on pedestals, when they fall, we lose faith in them, and it's never about them. Spirituality is not about the carrier. Spirituality is about the light itself. And when you see the light in someone else's eyes, it's not your light seeing their light. It's the light seeing itself. It's never about the messenger. If you think it's about the messenger, you're making a mistake. If the messenger tells you it's about me, don't believe that person. Like, I look at, a particular, I won't mention his name, but a particular yogi who became very famous, who ran hot yoga studios globally, once said, I am the most spiritual person you'll ever meet. And to me, I hear Lao Tzu in my head, those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak. And if you are saying that, you are not that. And because And I think that if everyone has the space inside themselves to know the truth that the light isn't theirs and to share it freely, like give it away, then humanity will have the opportunity to unite in a new way. I know that sounds pie in the sky, but now there are tens of millions of near-death experiences in America alone. all
Yes.
over the world.
Tens of
Pen
millions?
of Pim van Lommel, a
Wow.
retired researcher in Western Europe, is the number giver for that in his research.
Right.
And
Wow. Wow.
yeah, it's because science is raising the dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, science, you also, another wonderful thing are the Eben Alexanders and the Mary Neal and these amazing, people that are, I mean, you're amazing too, Peter, but the physicians,
The
the doctors,
rationalists.
yes, that who were materialists, that and they're just heads spinning around, and I think that's really bringing out to. And then I'm sure Jeff O'Driscoll
I
and
personally,
Jeffrey.
yep.
Yeah, I love those guys. I've interviewed both of them, and it's interesting because I interviewed Raymond Moody, and he said that's what finally their shared death experience was what
Yeah.
made him finally, after all these years, throw his hands up and say, I give up. I give up. You gotta love that guy. It's so good. Well, Peter, we need to wind it down, but gosh, I wanted, could you please just share a little bit about centering prayer and yoga and how you use that in your life, and how others could learn more about that? I know it sounds, well, anyway, that. And also just any practical spiritual tools we can all use to help find balance in life.
I would say, first off, that you can read every book in the world about yoga and mysticism, and you can know all the names about everything, and you can have a very strong knowledge and not know a single thing about the unity. And so it's really not about book knowledge. It's and I say that as someone who I've pursued this with my life. I mean, that's
Yes.
my thing.
And you're very academic.
I am.
Obviously.
And
Yes.
but it's all as a mechanism of expression, not as a mechanism of understanding. It's the understanding itself. It comes simply by turning oneself inward and seeking heaven within. And and I think one of the most maligned spiritual teachers of the ages is Jesus, because
Yes.
Christianity kind of ruined him in a lot of ways for a lot of people.
Yes.
But
Yes.
among the things he said, like I said, was turn your eye single and your body's filled with light. He also said, seek heaven above all things, and all things will be added unto you. And so the idea of centering prayer is it's like, I would call it heartfulness prayer, heartfulness meditation, mindfulness meditation. It's very similar. Mindfulness meditation, you get all the benefits of mindful meditation, peace and calmness and self-awareness and observing yourself and all those good things. But with heartful meditation, you get all of those things, and you orient yourself to the divine, and you get all these spiritual gifts as a result.
Right.
And so centering prayer is a technique of self-negation. It's the carving away at the duality of the ego. It's carving away at the duality of the ego, and the ego is always the one telling us who we are and what we're doing and what our story is. And so when you get in, meditation is super simple, and it's complex in that it takes determination. So dark room, phones off, eyes shut. I sit in the chair I'm sitting in, or I have a zafu and a zubaton I kneel with. But I sit in this chair. I try not to use any muscles to support my back. I try to let my skeletal structure hold the weight, so that I'm not straining anything. Hands on my lap, eyes shut. I have a simple prayer. I use the Jesus prayer, which comes out of Eastern Orthodoxy, nod to my background. And I breathe that in and I breathe that out 1,000,000 times. And I focus my mind on my third eye primarily as I begin. I drive my mind and my breath up to here, and I keep my mind and my breath here. And I ride my prayer word very gently. I don't grasp it and I don't hold it. I let it ride on my breath. And when my mind runs away, I don't try to chase after it. I just go back to my word. And as far as my mind goes, a minute it's been off and running, I just come back to my word. And what happens is is that as you burn your prayer into your mind learns to pray on its own all the time, like a tape loop running in the back, so that when you begin your meditative practice, it's already running there. All you have to do is bring it up to the forefront in order to engage with it. It's like the engine's already running. You just need to put it in gear. And
Right.
when you're in this place, the word can fall away. The word matters only insofar as that it's brief and that it focuses the mind and reminds you of the presence of God.
The mantra.
The mantra. I'm talking about a mantra.
Yes.
That's right. I'm talking about a mantra.
Yes.
And then what happens is that the mantra drops away and you're left observing the breath. And you can just observe the breath with no running story. Just observe the breath. And then the breath can fall away and you can fall inside this space of peace. And you might just get there for a second. And as soon as you think, I'm in the space of peace, you're out. And you got to go back to the mantra. When you're observing your breath, as soon as you observe, I'm observing my breath, you're out. And this particular practice of sitting with perception without grasp is an advantage for anyone who has a mystical experience when they're popped out of their body or they have a visitation of a presence, because the technique applies to not grasping then either. Because as soon as you grasp at that, as soon as you say angel presence or there's the light, you're out.
Yes.
So the longer you get this, the more you practice this technique, the longer, if you have one of those experiences, which it encourages as a result of the long practice, because you're basically digging your way back to God from this side.
Right.
Your action is to become more aware of the presence of the light, which then makes the light more present.
Yes.
These two things work in combination. So meditation is simply a mantra and breath repeated unendingly with dedication. If you try it for 7 days, you'll find in those 7 days, for 20 minutes, you'll find a moment where this works for you. And if you stay at it, it keeps getting better until the body demands that you do it. And it rewires the brain physically. You get brain plasticity. It rewires the brain in order to make this easier for you. So that's meditation.
So, is there anything I haven't asked you? I could talk to you all day. Is there anything I haven't asked you or some words of wisdom you'd just like to wrap this up with?
Yeah, I can wrap it up with love, and that humanity is built to love each other. Mothers love their children, children love their grandmothers, cousins love cousins, brothers love sisters. There's hate in the world too. But love is the thing that's built into us, and that's the treasure of life. And every amount of love that you give away to your cat, and your cat gives to you back, you get to keep that love. Love is the treasure of earth. Love is the treasure of heaven. And if there's a purpose to living, it's to bring love to earth. Become a channel of the peace. Become a channel of the love. And the last thing I'll say is, if it's God you want, don't pursue anything else. Seek the oneness of being over and over and over again, and you will find your way.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. It's just been an honor and a pleasure to talk to you and get to know you. You have a wonderful day.
Peace to you, Marlon. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.